years ago, Google Maps released an April Fool's video about the ability to hunt for Pokémon all around the globe. It came with an extremely minimal game where you tapped around a map, but it was a fun little distraction. A year later, and it turns out that members of the Google Maps team, Pokémon, and Niantic, a company behind the region-based Ingress game, were actually working on a real phone application for capturing Pokémon in the real world. And today, that vision is now a nationwide sensation that seems ready to take the world by storm once it hits full release. Pokémon Go fever is everywhere. Like I suggested back when the game was announced, it isn't quite that epic AR simulation as the trailer would have you expect, and it definitely isn't a main series Pokémon port for phones. It's a mobile-specific title, very similar to Ingress, but wrapped in a complete Pokémon skin. Players use their phones and built-in GPS to travel around the country, collecting items at key real-world locations while hunting for new Pokémon on a touchscreen. A lot of elements that players are familiar with return, such as evolving, egg hatching, and battling, although many of the mechanics are a little different from what longtime Pokémon fans might be used to. Players also swear allegiance to one of three teams, protecting and building your team's colors through combat at one of the many Pokémon gyms set up throughout the country. Pokémon Go is one of the most interesting video games I have ever played. It's an extremely unique part of gaming culture that I can't really explain, but as a Pokémon fan from the very beginning, I want to share my thoughts on this new chapter in the Pokémon universe. I'm going to be doing this review a little differently than usual. I usually list what I like about a game, comment on its faults, and then wrap everything up in a conclusion. Today we're entering the distortion world because I'm going the other way around. I have a lot of good things to say about Pokémon Go, but I want to lead off by talking about some of the many problems that I've had with the app so far. I'm going somewhere with this, but for now, here are some of the biggest frustrations I've had with Pokémon Go. This game crashes more than any phone app I have ever played, and I've played hundreds. I played in the Pokémon Go field test, and I feel like the main release actually crashes even more than the beta did. Sometimes the whole thing dies, sometimes the game just freezes when I throw a Pokéball, sometimes the locations don't load, and sometimes I discover all new game-breaking glitches that I've never seen before. Whether it's Android or iOS, it doesn't seem to make a difference. This game is a disaster zone when it comes to long-term play, and I rarely get a session for longer than 15 minutes without needing to completely restart the app. On top of this, sometimes the game can't even launch because the servers are offline. This has been dropping a little bit as of late, but it's clear that the servers just weren't ready for this many players. And on a side note, this game is a monstrous battery drain, even with the battery saving mode enabled. The instability of Pokémon Go is by far its biggest flaw. For a game that lives off of in-app purchases for items that last for a limited amount of time, it's crippling to a player's trust when they activate an item, only to have the game crash or the servers disappear halfway through. Another major issue I have with Go is that it has virtually no tutorial explaining how to enjoy its many features. There is a bare-bones conversation that you can have with the professor, but much of the rest of the game is a complete mystery for players to either discover on their own through trial and error, or find with other external fan sites. I've considered becoming one of those fan options by giving you guys some helpful Go tips in a YouTube video, but the bottom line is that we should have a much better in-game explanation for things like your throw capture strength, and candy, and gym battle mechanics, leveling up, and more. This is a minor gripe, but another thing I have a mild issue with is in the gameplay itself. Each Pokemon gives you candy that you use to level up and evolve, but only candy that can be used for one Pokemon's evolution line. Some evolutions, such as Magikarp, require an absurd amount of candy for a single evolution, forcing you to capture hundreds of Carps in order to evolve just one of them. You can get additional candy per Pokemon by releasing them to the professor, so capturing hundreds of Pokemon that you essentially dispose over and over again is kind of a weird theme to revolve a Pokemon game around. I know mass breeding is a small component of the main game, especially when breeding for shinies or good IVs, and then you dump a lot of Pokemon that way, but I was definitely surprised to see this be the main mechanic that every player must go through to become stronger in Go. Because Pokémon is a location-based game, it lends itself to some locations being better for playing. In particular, major US cities are covered in the game's crucial item-dropping Pokéstops as well as gyms. I just so happen to live in San Francisco now, hometown to the developer, Niantic, so my daily walk to work is covered in gameplay. But for players in suburban and especially rural areas, you just might be out of luck. I've seen some pretty barren areas with almost no gameplay items. Aside from using the incense, there isn't a lot to do in the app if you aren't constantly moving around and finding their in-game locations. A major feature of the game is to encourage players to travel to new areas while playing, but this game is always going to benefit players that are already living in high population areas full of stops. While I'd say that capturing Pokémon is a major part of the Go experience, battling to control and defend your team at a gym is probably the second largest aspect. And honestly, I just don't really like the battle system in the game right now. You tap for one attack, you hold for a second attack that unlocks over time, and you swipe to the sides to dodge. It's a pseudo Punch-Out, and I've seen some really good pseudo Punch-Out on mobile before. Infinity Blade? Nailed it. This is not Infinity Blade. It's really hard to tell when attacks are even hitting you or not, so dodging is really tough, and it's a long delay to use your secondary attack, so most of the time it just devolves into rapidly tapping the screen with your primary attack over and over again. I think with a few tweaks it could be a little more engaging, but for now it definitely isn't my favorite part of the experience. I understand Go is a mobile title, but the core gameplay right now is really light. A lot of the features that we've seen in the past Pokemon Go trailers, like trading with friends or giant group boss fights, are things that will be implemented sometime in the future. There isn't even a way to make a dedicated friends list. And while the original 151 Pokemon are definitely charming, as a player that has explored and loved all 700 plus creatures, I definitely wouldn't mind seeing more Pokemon outside of Kanto finding their way into the Go world soon. And my final fear for Pokemon Go, and this is arguably the most important, is that it could be unsafe. This is a game that requires physical travel in order to progress through the game, and there are a lot of negative things that can happen from that one major gameplay feature. I've seen a million headlines out there talking about various gruesome things that have happened to Pokemon Go players, and a majority of these headlines are completely falsified, but that doesn't mean that the danger isn't there anytime you travel to an unfamiliar area. All I can say here is that children should always play with an adult, and even adults should always play this game in groups or during the day. And as the giant Gyarados constantly reminds you in the game's loading screen, be aware of your surroundings while you play this game. The upcoming hands-free Pokemon Go Plus device should make this aspect a little bit better, but it costs over $30, and in the meantime, I can't help but notice that I've run into tons of players playing this game without looking ahead to see where they're going. So those are all the issues I have with Go. Some of them are just me nitpicking as a hardcore Pokemon fan, but some of them are pretty legitimate concerns. But why, J-Wits, did you decide to put all these negative things out first? Because simply put, even despite all the many shortcomings that could turn various gamers and non-gamers away from Pokemon Go, it is still the biggest thing in gaming right now for me. Never in my life have I been able to visually identify so many active players for a single game. All around the city, all around my neighborhood even. I know that Ingress and many other titles carved the way for location-based gameplay to exist, but this is the first time this kind of game has been applied to a franchise as big as Pokémon, and the mixture is an instant hit. It's absolutely everywhere, from the internet's constant memes to the real world. I like a lot about Pokémon Go, despite all of the imperfections. The bulk of Go's gameplay is built around throwing Pokéballs, and while it's pretty simple in execution, I actually have a lot of fun with it. Trying to line up an awesome throw to hit the opposing Pokémon's ring definitely has a bit of a learning curve to it, but it's the perfect mix of engagement while still being a pretty passive activity that you can do while traveling from place to place. I especially love that you can put spin on your ball to throw a curve. It's simple fun. Overall, I think Go's models look pretty solid. They aren't mind-blowing, but they're a high enough resolution to look pretty appealing on most major phones, and there's something charming about seeing new characters pop up in the palm of your hand. This factor is amplified a ton by the game's AR feature, which allows you to superimpose Pokemon over anything that your camera sees through its lens. Even if you never travel far and wide or participate in gym battles, arguably the most popular feature of Pokemon Go right now is using the app to make your own Pokemon reality pictures. I've seen photos that range from beautiful to straight comedy, but one thing is for sure, Go photos have had a dominating presence on social media all throughout this past week, and it's been pretty entertaining seeing what fans around the nation have been taking photos of. To somewhat counter what I mentioned earlier, I do love that this app is encouraging players to get outside and explore the world around them. While I can't stress enough that this should only be done in safe environments, I've heard multiple heartwarming stories of players learning to better themselves, both socially and physically, by getting up and walking around. I believe that Pokemon and Niantic's Go is actively improving a ton of gamers' quality of life, and that is fantastic. And for the time being, this game is one of the largest and most active player bases I've ever seen, and the game's hardly existed for a week. It's been dominating top threads all over Reddit. Gamers are just starting to figure out comfortable ways to stream the game around the world on Twitch, and it immediately climbed to the top of the most watched games chart. And whenever I play this game for myself, consistently every time, I've run into fellow players. Every ethnicity, age, gender, there are players everywhere in all shapes and sizes. And while I can't say my experience is guaranteed to be the same as everybody else's, I have found nothing but interesting, kind, and engaging people all over this short journey. Just yesterday, I was at San Francisco's Japantown Mall when a group suddenly started chanting about a Nidoqueen nearby. I joined in the capture, talked with the group, and we all celebrated. The Pokemon community has been actively growing for years, but this is the most I've heard about Pokemon in public since the year 2000, when Pokemania was at its peak and every child in the schoolyard had the game. Pokemon Go isn't even out yet in many countries outside of the US, and it's on pace to reach tens of millions of players already. Is it just a fad? Possibly, but it's still near magic to witness in action. If Pokemon and Niantic can patch up the game's issues, especially with stability in servers, as well as get us a few more gameplay elements like trading in new Pokemon, they can pave the way to one of the most successful phone apps of all time. But in the meantime, dang, it has been an exciting week to be a Pokemon fan. The app is far from perfect, but the amount of pure joy that I've had from meeting so many amazing people has made it one of the most memorable gaming experiences I've had in a long time. I'm very excited for the future of this game, and I really hope that the developers take this amazing opening spike that they've been given and they run with it. Thank you for watching this review. I hope you've been enjoying the Pokemon action as much as I've been, and if you're in one of the countries that doesn't have Go available yet, I hope that you get a release in your area soon. If this is one of the first times you've seen this channel, consider clicking the subscribe button to follow my content. I have some more Pokemon Go video ideas that could come very soon, and I really hope you guys enjoy them. Have a great day, and I'll catch you guys next time with more Nintendo content.